Jekyll had almost reached the top. He had been climbing for what felt like over an hour. The pads of his fingers were bright red and his knuckles white as he tried to keep his grip on the slippery moss and lichens. This was the first time he had ever been to the ruins. His sister had been here before, but she had never described it to him. The building was worn from rain and years of disrepair, but it still stood strong and was fairly easy to climb. His hands and arms were starting to ache, but he could see the top of the tallest dome and it wasn't far off. His feet found a ledge and he tried to stand, but he slipped. His heart skipped a beat as he started to fall, but at the last second a hand grabbed the front of his shirt. He looked up into the face of his sister. The wind near the top of the temple was making her blonde hair flow like spider silk, and her golden eyes, yes, golden eyes, were like two spiders dancing in it. This, of course, meant that she was the exact polar opposite of him, with his thick black hair and dull gray eyes. It was funny. Despite them being twins, they had nothing in common. He saw himself as a normal 16-year-old boy, and she was hailed as some sort of divine creation, and yet she did not act like one. She was a survivalist, the kind that knows the difference between two similar-looking berries or mushrooms. She was also always coming back from the forest with dirt between her nails and leaves in her hair and mud on her face. Yet, she always looked perfect. She even knew how to fashion some vines into a rope, which she was using to support herself. And now, him.
I told you to watch your footing up here. The moss and lichen aren't that good of grips, you know.
And she hoisted him up onto the dome. That was another thing. She was strong, both physically and mentally, which was another difference. He looked down and he got a little dizzy. He had this thing with heights where he got nervous, and this was unbelievably high. He looked up and turned away from the ledge to the rest of Erivale.
So, is it amazing or not at all worth the trip?
His sister asked, mocking him with the last part. And the scene before him was breathtaking. Through the two pillars at the front of the temple, he could see his village framed in the distance. To his right, he could see the beginnings of the swamp of Marsip. And to his right, he could see the ocean. And beyond that, the endless horizon. It was a beautiful sight. One he thought could only be found in dreams.
It's, well...
He stumbled for the words. The wind started to blow and tousle his hair as the sun glared down on his face from the cloudless sky. The smell of a new spring was refreshing. He could almost taste the future crops that were or would be planted. The birds fluttered after flies, and a herd of deer ran past the temple on one side. Looking down, the way he had climbed up kicked his phobia into motion, and he realized something he hadn't considered before.
We've got to climb all the way back down, don't we?
Yep, let's go. We don't want to be left outside the gates after they close, especially with the storm coming in.
She slung her bow over her shoulders and began to climb back down.
What storm?
But she was already out of earshot. She was a fast climber. He realized he should probably hurry after her before she left him behind.
Hey, Kiara, wait!
He went to climb after her, and at that moment the birthmark on his left shoulder started to heat up. He looked back and the sun vanished behind the first clouds of the storm coming in off the ocean, and it stopped. Just the sun, he thought. Just the sun. And he hurried to catch up with his sister, who had already made it to the forest floor and slung their catch of rabbits over her shoulder. They reached the gate in pouring rain, just as the gatekeeper was closing up the town for the night. She looked up as they approached and let them through with,
"This'll be the only time I let it go. Next time, I'm closing it, and I ain't opening it again. I don't care who you are or what your business is."
She always said that. She had said that the past 8 times. The gate was locked and had a plank placed across it. Jackal never understood the reason for the gates and walls. probably just an extra precaution to help keep out animals, raiders, and thieves. They walked the streets in the pouring night rain. A group of traveling soldiers from the capital city, Erivale, had dragged a traveling band of gypsies from the inn into the street and were testing them for vampirism and lycanthropy. The current triad saw them as a threat to the people, considering vampires drank the blood of the living and werewolves went into a rageful, uncontrolled bloodlust every month. They ordered any that were found to be executed. Jackal couldn't help but watch with held breath to see the outcome of these travelers.
Move along, citizen,
said one of the soldiers. Jackal snapped out of his gaze and continued as he heard one of the women start begging. He looked back over his shoulder and saw the guards prying a crying child from the woman's arms. The soldier took a knife and drew a small cut into the baby's forearm. The child obviously cried out as the skin was opened. The cut closed up in a matter of seconds. The guard took a silver knife and raised it high. Jackal turned away in time to only hear the thud and the woman screaming through sobs. The law was the law. What more could he do? They arrived at their father's shop, which was right below their house, and went inside. Kiara trudged right on while Jackal tried his best to remove the mud from his boots. The shop was set up with a U-shaped counter. Things for sale were displayed either in the glass cases or hanging on the walls. Outside was a set of stairs that led up to their living area. In the back and to the right was a door that led to a storage room where they kept their wares. In the back to the left was a door that led to the cellar. Kiara brought the animals they caught down to the basement. Jackal headed to the storage room, which also had a door that went out to the back garden where their father usually was when they got home. He was not out in the pouring rain, which surprised Jackal. He was usually out under all circumstances, as the garden was his favorite pastime and passion. He was probably out at the tavern's bar, waiting for the band of traveling gypsies to entertain the townsfolk. Jackal had a feeling there would be no entertainment from them. Jackal hoped the heavy rainfall didn't wash away the seeds, which had been sown the day before. He followed the trail of mud back to the cellar, where he met Kiara.
So, 5 rabbits. I'd say that's a good day, right?
Yeah, I guess. Could have been better.
Jackal said, leaning up against the wall. He had had better days, but he was better with traps rather than Kiara's bow. But this wasn't the worst day he had ever had. One day he came back with nothing at all. He felt miserable at first, but then Kiara had done the same the next day. Whether on purpose or not, it had made him feel better. At that moment they heard the door open and their father come into the store, shaking his coat off and stomping his boots off at the front. They heard him walk across the floor carefully as not to step in the mud piles and came downstairs to where they were. He was looking gray as ever. He carried a solemn presence with him wherever he went. He had lines set into his face that hinted at a past filled with joy. Maybe not pure enjoyment, as he had been a soldier before meeting their mother, but he had a sense of wisdom and experience that everyone seemed to respect.
Evening.
He said before yawning.
So, how'd it go?
Good.
Responded Jackal.
What'd you get? Or catch?
Got some rabbits, that's about it.
Well, some is better than none, right?
He flashed a smile that hinted at sarcasm. There was an awkward silence. There was no explanation for it, yet it was just there. The only sound was Kiara on the cutting board as she skinned and cut the rabbits into parts to be either sold in the store or for them to eat.
Anyway,
His father's voice cut through the silence.
who thinks they can spare the day to help out in the shop?
What?
Kiara asked, looking over her shoulder.
I need some extra help tomorrow. Shop's a little messy, and by messy I mean coated in dust. Not to mention the mud trails you left through the place. I could also use a hand in organizing the storage. Had a big shipment come in from Prospect Land. I didn't have the time to organize it myself.
I guess I could help.
Kiara said from her position, once again hunched over the rabbits.
No, you're the better hunter.
Jackal said.
I'll help.
You sure? 'Cause it's no big deal.
Yes, I'm sure. Don't think you'd like being cooped up in a small place like that anyway.
So then it's settled?
Their father had been patiently waiting, but it was clearly out of exhaustion.
Yep.
Good, because I'm tired.
He finally admitted. He left the cellar and went up and out to the stairs leading to their house. It was a nice little house on the outskirts of town. It jutted out a bit over the shop's entrance, creating an overhang. Not much, but it was home. They had been raised there by their father for as long as they could remember. They hadn't known their mother, and neither did anyone else. No one seemed to have any recollection of her or any idea who she was. According to the townsfolk, their father just showed up one day with them and a single chest, taking up residence in the abandoned building that became their home. This caused the townfolk to feel uneasy around Jackal and his family, though they did their best not to show it.
You should probably get some sleep.
He heard his sister say from her place at the cutting board, never looking up.
Tomorrow's going to be either easy or difficult. I'm going with difficult.
Yeah, sure. Oh, definitely.
He said sarcastically.
Hey, be sure to check on the traps at the big oak tree and the one by the stream.
Okay.
She said, half listening to him. Jackal sat awake in his room, looking at the waning moon. The rain had stopped, allowing the moon in its shining brilliance to reach out into the night. As he stared at the light, he started to drift off to sleep. The dream had happened many times before, but it scared him every time. He and his sister were standing on a cliff, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, the mist spraying their faces. As the day wore on, the waves grew longer, larger, and darker. Eventually, one surged up, blocking out the sun and taking the form of a huge figure. It kept growing until the seawater extinguished the sun's flames entirely. It laughed and the noise echoed through the sky and around the world. And at this moment was when he realized he had been running away. But the thing was that the wave was pulling the ground towards him, and his sister seemed frozen in her tracks, being pulled towards the shape. He ran towards her and got close enough that he grabbed hold of his sister's arm, pulling her away. But then these creatures erupted from the hole, crawling, flying, and slithering towards them. They took hold of both of them as they were pulled towards the black abyss. His sister was pulled into the seething water and disappeared inside. And as the shape grabbed hold of him, a single, thin needle of light broke out of the darkness. Multiple more pierced out from the waters, shriveling the creatures that had hold of him and blinding him until he woke up. The sun was beginning to rise, and his father was knocking on the door, telling him he needed to get up if they were ever going to get things done. Jackal flipped the covers off and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes. The sun coming through the window on his back was warm and comforting. Just what he needed after that nightmare. He pulled on some casual clothes before heading down to the store.